The wind moves first through the mud brick alleys of the city, carrying dust that catches in torchlight like ash from a dying fire. Inside a modest home near the riverbank, a mother kneels beside a woven cradle, her hands trembling as she presses a small clay amulet against her newborn's chest. Her lips move in a whisper too urgent to be called a prayer and too desperate to be anything else. Outside, dogs begin to howl at nothing visible, and somewhere beyond the mud brick walls, a donkey shrieks into the darkness. The mother does not stop whispering. She has heard the stories since she was a child herself, stories passed from grandmother to mother to daughter across the flooding cycles of the Tigris and Euphrates. Stories about a being who slips through windows on nights when infants sleep unprotected, who reaches into cradles with lion's claws, who feeds on the breath of the newly born. She does not say the name aloud, not tonight, not when the air itself feels thick with intention. She simply prays that the small bronze figure hanging above the doorway, carved with a grotesque canine face and bulging eyes, will do what it was made to do. That figure, standing guard against the nightmare, was carved in the terrifying likeness of a second demon, one so feared that people invited its image into their homes, believing that only a monster could frighten away another monster. This is the story of Lamashtu, the demon ancient Mesopotamia feared above nearly all others, and of Pazuzu, the entity conjured to stand against her in an eternal, invisible war fought over the lives of children. Long before Rome rose from its 7 hills, before the pyramids of Giza pierced the Egyptian sky, the civilizations of Mesopotamia were already recording their deepest fears in wedge-shaped marks pressed into wet clay. Sumerian and later Akkadian scribes, writing in cuneiform across thousands of tablets recovered from sites like Nineveh, Nippur, and Ashur, preserved an enormous body of incantations, medical texts, and ritual instructions devoted to a single terrifying figure. She appears under several names across different periods and dialects, most consistently as Lamashtu, sometimes written as Lamastu or Labartu. Unlike many Mesopotamian supernatural beings who served the gods as messengers or enforcers, Lamashtu occupied a unique and disturbing category. She was not sent by any deity to punish wrongdoing. She acted on her own will, driven by malevolence that required no justification, and this independence made her uniquely dangerous in a cosmological system where nearly every form of suffering was believed to have divine cause and divine remedy. The earliest textual evidence for fear of Lamashtu stretches back to the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, with her mythology fully developed by the Old Babylonian period, roughly the early 2nd millennium BCE. Surviving incantation series, particularly those cataloged by modern Assyriologists under the title Lamashtu series, describe her origins as the daughter of the sky god Anu, a lineage that granted her terrible authority even as her actions horrified the divine order she came from. According to these texts, the gods themselves eventually expelled her from heaven, casting her down among mortals as punishment for her cruelty. Once among humanity, she became something no ritual could fully banish, only ever repel. Picture a birthing chamber in the city of Ur, its mud brick walls warmed by oil lamps, reed mats spread across the floor, the air thick with incense meant to purify the space. A midwife moves with practiced urgency, but her eyes flick constantly toward the doorway, because Babylonian and Assyrian medical texts describe childbirth itself as a moment of maximum vulnerability, a threshold when the presence of Lamashtu was believed most likely. Ancient physicians, who also functioned as ritual specialists, described her as possessing the head of a lion, the teeth of a donkey, bared and yellowed, and hands that ended in the sharp talons of a bird of prey. Some depictions show her nursing a pig and a dog simultaneously, grotesque inversions of the nurturing mother she sought to destroy in others. She was believed to sneak into homes specifically to touch pregnant women, causing miscarriage, or to enter nurseries and either strangle infants, poison them with her touch, or replace healthy sleep with sickness that mimicked the wasting fevers so common and so fatal in the ancient world. If you find value in documentaries built from primary sources rather than borrowed legend, this is a good moment to subscribe, because the deeper this story goes, the more remarkable the archaeological record becomes. What makes Lamashtu extraordinary among ancient supernatural threats is not merely the terror she inspired, but the sheer volume of physical evidence documenting how people fought back against her. Archaeologists have recovered dozens of small bronze and clay plaques, many dating to the first millennium BCE, specifically designed as protective devices against her. These plaques typically show Lamashtu standing on a donkey, sailing across water, surrounded by threatening animals, while above her looms a second, equally monstrous figure directing the scene. That figure is Pazuzu. Pazuzu himself has become one of the most recognizable demonic images to survive from the ancient Near East, largely because of a striking bronze statuette held in the Louvre and a distinctive bronze head housed in the British Museum, both dated to the first millennium BCE, likely the Neo-Assyrian or Neo-Babylonian period. His depiction is unmistakable and deliberately horrifying. A canine or leonine face with bulging eyes and bared teeth, a scaled body, an erect scorpion tail, taloned feet, and most distinctively, 2 pairs of wings extended as though caught mid-flight. Cuneiform inscriptions found on several Pazuzu amulets identify him explicitly as king of the wind demons, a being associated with the scorching, disease-bearing winds that swept in from the desert, and, according to some texts, with malaria-like fevers that plagued river communities during flood season. Here lies one of the most psychologically fascinating aspects of ancient Mesopotamian religion. Pazuzu was not considered benevolent. He was still classified among malevolent spirits, still capable of bringing plague and misfortune. Yet inscriptions found on amulets, including a well-documented example now in the Berlin Museum bearing an incantation naming him explicitly, revealed that people petitioned him for protection specifically against Lamashtu, believing that his power over destructive winds and disease made him strong enough to drive her away. Families hung small Pazuzu head amulets, often no larger than a thumb, around the necks of pregnant women and above the beds of infants. Some larger bronze figures, complete with a ring for suspension, were positioned facing outward from doorways and windows, believed to confront Lamashtu the moment she attempted entry. This was not comfort drawn from a kind protector. It was strategy drawn from desperation, an ancient recognition that sometimes only a monster can be trusted to fight another monster. The ritual response to Lamashtu extended far beyond amulets alone. Specialized incantation priests known as ashipu were trained specifically in exorcistic and protective rites, and among their most detailed procedural texts are instructions for banishing her. One well-preserved ritual, part of the broader Lamashtu series, compiled from tablets found at Ashurbanipal's library in Nineveh, describes crafting a small clay figure of the demon herself, binding it, and performing a ceremony in which the figure is symbolically placed on a boat made of reeds or wood, then set adrift on the river or buried at a crossroads. actions meant to physically expel her from the household and send her back toward the netherworld, from which she was believed to periodically emerge. Salt, specific plants, including the tamarisk, and particular incense recipes were burned during these rites, following recipes recorded with startling specificity across multiple surviving tablets, suggesting these were not isolated folk practices, but standardized medical religious procedures taught and repeated across generations of ritual specialists. It is worth pausing on what this reveals about how seriously the threat was taken at every level of society. This was not fear confined to superstitious peasants, while priests and kings looked on with skepticism. Royal correspondence and administrative texts from the Neo-Assyrian court, including letters exchanged between King Esarhaddon and his scholars in the 7th century BCE, show that protective magic against demonic threats, Lamashtu among them, was treated as a matter of state importance, particularly surrounding the health of royal heirs. The survival of a dynasty could depend, in the ancient understanding, on the successful ritual protection of an infant prince from exactly the kind of danger Lamashtu represented. Kings funded temple rituals, commissioned protective amulets, and consulted diviners not merely from personal anxiety, but because political stability was tied directly to royal succession, and royal succession was tied, in their worldview, to victory in this unseen war. If this kind of deep, evidence-based exploration into ancient belief systems interests you, consider leaving a comment sharing which ancient civilization or legend you would like to see explored in this level of depth next, because these deep dives take considerable research, and knowing what resonates helps shape what comes next. The fear of Lamashtu did not remain confined to Mesopotamia alone. Her mythology and the protective rituals surrounding her spread outward through trade, conquest, and cultural exchange across the ancient Near East. Traces of related demonic figures threatening women in childbirth appear in Hittite and Canaanite material, and some scholars have drawn connections between Lamashtu and later Northwest Semitic traditions surrounding female night demons, though the precise lines of influence remain a subject of ongoing academic debate rather than settled fact. What can be stated with confidence, based on the archaeological distribution of Pazuzu and Lamashtu artifacts, is that belief in this demonic threat persisted for well over 1,000 years, from early 2nd millennium Babylonian texts through the Neo-Assyrian period in the 1st millennium BCE, an extraordinary span of continuity for any single supernatural tradition in the ancient world. The image of Lamashtu herself also carried symbolic weight beyond simple monstrousness. Her portrayal as a being who inverts natural motherhood, nursing dangerous animals rather than human children, kneeling to suckle a pig and a dog, while surrounded by scorpions and snakes, reflects a broader ancient anxiety about the fragility of the boundary between civilization and chaos. In a world where infant and maternal mortality rates were devastatingly high, where the causes of miscarriage, stillbirth, and childhood fever were entirely invisible to available medical understanding, Lamashtu gave shape and face to suffering that otherwise had none. She transformed inexplicable tragedy into an adversary that could, at least in theory, be fought, named, ritually confronted, and sometimes even defeated. If you appreciate documentaries that prioritize what the archaeological and textual record actually shows over dramatized invention, a like on this video helps signal that historical accuracy still matters to viewers, and it genuinely helps carry this kind of research-driven work further. Consider once more that mother in her mud brick home beside the Euphrates, the Pazuzu amulet swinging gently above the doorway as the wind outside finally begins to still. She does not know the name of the scribe who first wrote down the incantation her grandmother taught her. She does not know that centuries later, fragments of clay tablets bearing nearly identical words will be excavated from the ruined libraries of Nineveh and Ashur, preserved by the same fires that once destroyed the cities that made them. She knows only that morning is coming, that her child is still breathing, and that somewhere in the darkness beyond her walls, a war fought entirely in belief, ritual, and desperate hope was, for one more night, won. For those drawn to the forgotten fears that once shaped entire civilizations, subscribing and enabling notifications ensures you will not miss future explorations into the buried gods, dreaded demons, and lost rituals of the ancient world. Stories recovered one fragile clay tablet at a time. Lamashtu endured as a figure of terror for over a millennium, not because Mesopotamian civilization was primitive or credulous, but because she answered a need that persists at the very foundation of human vulnerability, the need to understand why suffering falls upon the innocent. She gave the unbearable a shape. She gave grief an enemy. And in Pazuzu, carved with wings and talons and a face designed to horrify, the people of the ancient Near East found something even more remarkable than a monster to fear. They found a monster willing, in their belief, to stand between them and the darkness. Long after the ziggurats crumbled and the cuneiform script fell silent for thousands of years, the small bronze faces of Pazuzu remained buried in the earth, waiting, still baring their teeth outward, still facing the door, still standing guard against a terror that had, by then, no one left to protect.